I'm back again for more of Chapter 5. We're going to continue on with the lecture slide number 28. This will be over Lexington and Concord, and we're talking about, first of all, the probably two of the most noteworthy events that we have coming out of this pre-official revolutionary period. It just so happens that Lexington and Concord are probably two of the most iconic battles that are in the minds of Americans. This is largely considered by many to be the initial offensive of what starts the American Revolution. But essentially, let's talk about it in its entirety here. On April 18th, 1775, we have General Gage, who is secretly assembling troops in Boston, about 700 redcoats, and they're going to serve under Commander Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith. And Smith is keeping the information that Gage gives him secret because they don't want word of what they're planning to get out to the colonials and possibly the Patriot resistance. So what the plan is, Gage wants Smith to take his army and march about 20 miles outside of Boston to the towns of Lexington and Concord. So he wants him to go to those towns to search out illegal caches of arms, ammunition, or supplies that are being hidden by the rebels. He doesn't want those to be used against British troops, so he wants to basically take those out of circulation, bring them into his custody. He also wants to arrest, if they can find them, John Hancock and Samuel Adams. By now, both of those men are considered to be the ringleaders, if you will, of the resistance movement. Certainly they're leaders in the unsanctioned provincial Congress. And so Gage would like to bring those two under house arrest, at least bring them into custody. Well, what happens is, and this is true throughout the Revolution, there are spies. There are people who claim to be just ordinary people or claim to be soldiers for one side or the other that are in fact secretly giving news and information and logistics and things back to the people they're really supporting. So on the British side, there are colonial spies, maybe some serving as pretending to be loyalist militia or pretending to be honest, good, loyal citizens of England. And when they get word about things like this, they pick up information in taverns and overhear conversations by troops, etc. Well, they get that information back to John Hancock, Samuel Adams, and others. In this case, there is word that is acquired about the nature of what Smith is going to do. So by 10 o'clock on the night of April 18th, there are these horseback riders who are informants and message carriers. Now, they're Patriot riders, essentially, who on horseback are dispersed to locate and warn Hancock and Adams to let them know, hey, the government's looking for you. You want to hide. You want to try to, secure yourself somewhere. And then, of course, to assemble resistance, assemble those Minutemen to be prepared when British troops come marching on the morning of the 19th. So the British aren't stupid. They realize that there are spies. They realize that there's going to be an attempt to probably try to notify the Patriot movement as to what's going on. Well, instead of that occurring, the British set up checkpoints outside of Boston, at intersections of roads, and just periodically to try to intercept some of these message carriers, because let's face it, 10 o'clock at night, no businesses are open. There's no parties usually going on. People should really be at their homes and farms, etc. So the British are pretty confident if they see somebody riding around in the middle of the night in a hurry, they're probably, unless they're seeking a doctor or something, they're probably not out for any good. So they start seizing and stopping people and saying, well, what brings you out at this time of night? Well, it just so happens a number of these riders are, in fact, captured. Now, among these are the more famous people, like, of course, William Dawes, who's a well-known citizen, and then Paul Revere, who already we've spoken about for his work in the depiction of the Boston Massacre. A much exaggerated depiction, but nevertheless, he was a popular guy. And he was instrumental in the Patriot movement. Well, Paul Revere manages to evade capture, as does a number of other writers. So word, despite the British attempts, word does get out into the countryside. The British are coming, the British are coming, all right? And this becomes the inspiration for that 1837 poem by Ralph Waldo Emerson called The Shot Heard Round the World. Because to many, this is considered the seminal moment where the revolution kicks into effectively high gear, you might say. All right, so that's slide 28. Let's go into slide 29 real quick. On the morning of April 19th, it's about dawn, it's very early, and the militia, a small body of militia anyway, about 70 Minutemen, are forming up in the village green in a town called Lexington. And they're under a militia captain by the name of John Parker. And some of the advanced guard, they are in fact, I believe, Royal Marines, they march into Lexington ahead of the big army that's marching out of Boston, right? And the British lieutenant colonel in charge of these Marines is the British lieutenant colonel in charge of the effort is Francis Smith. The commander of the Royal Marines, Major John Pitcairn, confronts the rebels at Lexington Square, and he orders them to disperse, to throw down their arms. And much like happened with the Boston Massacre, a shot ends up being fired. We don't know if it's from a scared militiaman who accidentally pulled his trigger on his weapon too fast. We don't know if it's a British soldier who saw somebody move and decided to go ahead and fire. We just know that somewhere on one side or the other, a shot was fired, and immediately the British start firing. As soon as one shot is fired, everybody fires. And so they fire into the militia. The militia responds. There's only one volley of fire taking place, meaning everybody fires what's in their weapon, and that's it. Because by then, the militia are fleeing in all directions. 8 Americans are killed, 10 are wounded. The British only suffer 1 wounded soldier, none killed. So you can imagine, emotions were high. Everyone was excited. So Lexington was essentially a wash as far as the Patriots were concerned, because the British just searched the town and didn't find a great deal, but searched the town and then started continuing their march another 4 miles inland to the town of Concord. Now it's about, because marching takes time, of course, it's a slow process. It's afternoon sometime that day on April 19th before the British actually make it to the outskirts of Concord. Now, by that time, word has gotten to Concord about the melee that occurred at Lexington. And so the British confront significant militia resistance, and we're moving now to slide 30, okay? The British move 4 miles into Concord. They confront more colonial militia on what's a location known as the North Bridge. And this forces the British to confront large amounts of civilian gunfire, and they were not prepared for something of this size, mind you. All right, and so the British order a general orderly withdrawal, not a whole-scale retreat. It's not like they're fleeing in terror. They're just in an organized fashion choosing to put their troops back in formation and do a withdrawing march out of Concord. Understand that continual Patriot fires coming from all directions, not only the North Bridge, but all through town. It's like snipers taking pot shots. The British send out troops to try to intercept them, and what happens is people run away before the troops arrive. So they get to where the shot was fired, and they don't find anybody, and they return back. So this goes on, and given the amount of resistance, the British send riders back to Boston to report, hey, we've run into a real problem here. So another 1,000 British soldiers, now understand there's about 700 in the field already, so another 1,000 British soldiers are marching out of Boston under the command of a British brigadier general by the name of Earl Hugh Percy. He's sent to reinforce and cover the retreat of the 700 troops that are already in the field. So when Percy and his 1,000 British troops meet up with Smith's retreating troops, now we've got a combined like 1,700, over 1,600 British troops in one group, now in an orderly way moving back in toward Boston. But it's during this time that there's an estimate of about 4,000 civilians, patriot, militia, and just regular civilians and farmers who pop up at different points during this retreat along this route, and they fire shots into the British army, okay? Now, some people were captured because they couldn't get away fast enough, but most everyone, they fire around and they take off. They're not hanging around. This isn't like a formal military battle. This is angry citizens firing a gun and running away, and then maybe coming back later to fire again and run away again. So the British take a lot of casualties during their retreat. They take about 273 casualties, as it's by the records of the day. About 65 troops are dead. They're killed during battle or during an ambush or whatever. You've got 173 or so that are wounded but are able to be ambulatory, meaning they can either march on their own or they're able to be put in a wagon and hauled away. And then there's about 26 British troops out of this event that either run off or just are unaccounted for. You know, we don't know what happened to them. Now, the Americans did suffer injury, right? This wasn't just a wash for them. 49 are reported dead. 49 either civilians or militia. There's 46 combined that are either wounded, identified as being wounded, or missing. They just, like, maybe they ran off, they got hurt, they ran off, and they didn't tell anybody. They just said, well, I'm out of here, and took off and went back home. But essentially it was the first time that large-scale bloodshed occurred between civilians, English civilian citizens, and the British government in the form of its soldiers. This was a big deal. This is really big. Okay, I've gone over a little bit of my time, so I'm going to stop here at slide 30. And the thing you need to know for the test is that the battles took place at Lexington and Concord, all right? And the reason that the troops were sent was to capture Hancock and Adams, and also to root out supplies and ammunition. All right, we'll stop there, and we'll go to the next video to continue the discussion.